given the writings that you have just published, I wanted to ask you about, you've written a couple of articles about this situation, and you did comment on Russia's role, how Russia's navigating this, but so much more, which I want to get into. So first, maybe talk about that, and then we can move on to some of the other points you made in the article.
Well, the key point is what we've been discussing from the beginning, what Erdogan and Putin decided behind closed doors. And this was personal, Danny. You remember Lavrov's body language at the table in Doha on Saturday when he was with Hakan Fidan from Turkey and Arakshi from Iran? Lavrov was pissed. I've never seen him like this, especially during this past year, for instance, because he knew that the deal was done and he was not fully aware of what this was all about. So this was not discussed at the level of foreign ministers, it was high up. There's a fascinating photo, which is, it's a riot in Turkey. You have the three neo-Ottomans, one behind the other. You have Erdogan close up, right behind him, Hakan Fidan, which was the former head of MIT, Turkish Intel. And right behind Fidan is Kalin, which is the current head of MIT, Turkish Intel. So this is you see the neo-Ottoman triumvirate in one picture. In Russia, you could never have a photo like this. You would be only Putin. You would have what? Gerasimov as number two. No, Gerasimov doesn't make policy. So this was Putin and Erdogan directly. And like I told you, Danny will never know. This is really up there. I will try to get some more into it, and I'm going to Istanbul before I go to Moscow next month. So I hope some people in Istanbul can at least, especially dissidents, well-informed dissidents, can tell us a little bit extra from what they are gathering, not from the pro-AKP press and pro-Erdogan press, different, but from some, relatively independent players who have access to Ankara, to the palace in Ankara. And there are some, and they're outside of the government, but they have their connections still. Usually diplomats, well-connected diplomats. So
Right.
it is in geopolitical terms, in terms of cliffhangers, it's what's going on is absolutely fascinating. And for all of us observers, it's total fog of war. We know what happened in Syria and how. We have no idea what could happen next. Putin's direct line is always an extraordinary show, and was quite interesting because I sent my question via email. And in fact, he answered it indirectly in the middle of one of his answers. My question was very simple. Did Russia suffer a strategic defeat in Syria? And basically Putin said, no, Russia has not been weakened by what happened in Syria. Of course, there are lots of nuances in his response, and the whole way he treated the Syrian episode and the connections with Turkey, Israel, and of course, how we came to the situation since Russia intervened in Syria in 2015. It was quite intriguing. Some of the answers on foreign policy, they were fascinating, but what they did not reveal, especially, and for what was implied. For instance, he was extremely diplomatic dealing with Turkey. Instead of basically getting into the heart of the whole matter, which is Erdogan's obsession with his neo-Ottomanist policies, Basically, in fact, in the column that I just wrote before I start talking to you and to our audience, it's with Sputnik, probably is going to come out later today or tonight in Russia. One of my intertitles is Erdogan is thinking about 1919, which is not as far-fetched as many people would think. He's actually thinking about what happened to the Ottoman Empire after the end of the First World War, all the promises that were there, and the lands that he considered that they are part of Turkey, which, in his own words, earlier this week, Greater Turkey is much bigger than Turkey itself. This is what he said. And obviously, everybody interpreted as, yes, he's going to annex Syrian territory, which he is already doing. But in his mind, Danny, it's fascinating. Thessaloniki, Cyprus, Aleppo, and even Mosul are included in this Greater Turkey, according to his 1919 interpretation. So Putin was extremely diplomatic. He didn't get into it. He said, they have problems with the Kurds, but now this can be solved because they are policing their southern borders. I just hope there's not going to be any further problems about all that. There will be. And Putin knows better than anyone. But he didn't get into it. At the same time, what he said about Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and the new authorities in Syria was extremely revealing. He actually said that, yes, we are talking. And it's not back channels, it's direct channels. We're going to try to find positions in common. And this brings us to a very, very thorny question. This means that Russia is now talking with Salafi jihadi terrorists directly. And this is not exactly a Russia's official position vis-a-vis terrorism, especially until a few days ago when Russia was fighting Salafi jihadi terror in Syria and elsewhere. So this proves that in terms of realpolitik, that's how it works, especially when you have a big power involved. Okay, the whole situation has changed. Irrespective of the deals, and we can say there is a lot of secret deals that were made. Among the three of the Astana process, Russia, Iran, and Turkey, until the last minute at that round table Saturday in Doha, before the fall of Damascus on Sunday, and the deals struck between Turkey and Israel and Russia and Israel. So obviously Putin was extremely circumspect, talking about this basically a big power gameplay. But what he said about Israel, he went up a notch. So this was also quite significant. If he was insisting on a dialogue with the new authorities in Syria, his own words, in terms of Russia's strategic priority, also his own definition, keeping the bases in Haimin and Tartus. These are the Russian priorities. So they have to talk with the new authorities in Syria, which are not the real authorities. The authority is Turkey. So he was implying that he's talking to Erdogan. And they are talking all the time. Back channels, phone calls that are not leaked, etc. Israel, he said at least three things that are quite significant. That Israel is the main beneficiary of what's happening in Syria. And you can read that in terms of the big picture. That he's not exactly sure what are Israel's long-term objectives in Gaza, which led him to condemning what's happening in Gaza, the genocide, without mentioning the word genocide, the term genocide. And he also condemned the annexation of land, stealing, annexation, invasion, annexation of Syria land by Israel. So this went up a notch. And obviously, this will be, considering how powerful is the Zionist lobby in Moscow, there will be repercussions about that. At the same time, which is also very, very interesting, and this comes from our Moscow connections, there was a fateful, long phone call Putin and Netanyahu. And guess what happened immediately afterwards? Israel started bombing every warehouse in the book and off the book containing Soviet and Russian weapons all across Syria. The big question, Danny, who gave these coordinates? And then we enter mega fog of war mystery. Nobody knows. I'm sure you have seen that a lot of people are blaming Assad for that. There's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that Assad did, especially Assad giving coordinates to Israel. Forget it. So this came, we can say, with a certain degree of certainty from sources in Russia. If they are from the Minister of Defense, affiliated with the Minister of Defense, if they are from intel agencies, factions inside the intel agencies, nobody knows. And if anybody says that they know, they're lying. So just this short introduction gives you and our audience a little bit of how extremely murky the situation is, and how, in many aspects, Putin's answers were evasive. They were very, very cleverly articulated. They left everything up in the air, except for this straight condemnation of Israel. Everything in terms of Turkey and Russia was up in the air. And of course, the fact that they are talking directly with Jolani and obviously with Erdogan about the future of Tartus and Hmeimim. So let's say this is our introduction to how complex the whole situation is. And we're not even talking about what he said about Ukraine.
Well, before we get to that, I wanted to ask you what you make of the reports about Russia possibly leaving Syria as we speak and moving their military assets to Libya. Is there any truth to this? Because
yes,
because I've heard different things, so I'm curious about your assessment.
Fog of war again, Danny. They are moving assets to Libya, no question. They may move some of these assets back to Russia, no question. And of course, we still don't know what's going to happen to Hmeimim and Tartus, because this ultimately, this is a direct negotiation between Erdogan and Putin. Considering that they are on very good speaking terms, no matter what happened before. And that comes back to all this fog of war about what kind of pre-fall of Damascus deal was struck between specifically Ankara and Moscow. Nobody knows for sure the terms of this deal. Obviously, there is a deal. There are two very good reasons already for it. Nothing happened with the Russian embassy in Damascus, number one, which is being protected, by the way, by HTS. That's quite something. Protecting from, obviously, more exalted Salafi jihadis, which may have other ideas, right? And the bases are still there. And the planes are coming and going. Transport planes are coming and going. And when it comes to transportation of Russian assets, many of these flights are overflying Turkish airspace. So this is a direct, a combination between at the highest level. All right. But we don't know the terms, and we'll probably will never know in, I would say, short to medium term. Same thing with Israel. We still don't know exactly what were the terms, even though Putin strongly condemned what Israel is doing in southern Syria. But what he did not say, which I thought was particularly interesting as well, was Iran and Russia, which would be inbuilt in that question of if Iran was weakened by what happened in Syria, if Russia was weakened by what happened in Syria, sorry, Iran was also weakened by what happened in Syria. He didn't answer anything about that, and nobody asked him about this, unfortunately, among the media that was there. And obviously, once again, we had a stupid question from NBC. That guy is beyond stupid. Everybody knows him in Moscow. And Rosenberg from the BBC, which is another asshole. The usual stupid questions. So, and this was an extremely important question, Iran-Russia, especially because next month, 5 days after Trump comes to power, they're going to sign the strategic partnership, Russia and Iran, and in Moscow, with Pezeshkian and Putin signing the agreement. So this is extremely important. It's still up in the air. What the thing about the pre-deals before the fall of Damascus makes sense because there's no especially because there's no manifest antagonism between Erdogan and Putin so far. Syria is a long story because Syria is bipartisan. It's different. Syria is the deep state. For the moment, the deep state won in Syria. We don't know for how long. But what started with Operation Timber Sycamore, all of you remember, I'm sure, which was basically do everything to destroy Assad. And then the Pentagon took over later on, and this preparation of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham was basically directed by the Pentagon. Which, by the way, they have 2,000 troops in Syria, right, Danny? We didn't know that. They just revealed to us a few days ago. We have at least 2,000 troops in Syria, which means they probably have 10,000.
Yeah, well, that number was far lower, in terms of public reporting.
Exactly.
When it comes to that. Yeah.
So this tactical victory, of course, but when you look at this, since the beginning of the war, for 13 and something years, it would have to happen because Syria was practically totally destroyed. It had to happen. Starved to death, everything, the sanctions, corruption, and of course the last few weeks, Samsonites full of cash, you name it. It was inevitable. And coming back to Assad, I'm not sure he will talk in public after this first declaration. We didn't explain much. No? Maybe Russia wants to keep him in the background for a while, see where this is going. Because don't forget, he could come back later, in a few years, for instance. Anything is possible. And considering that the Russians are always a few steps ahead, chess-wise, anything is possible. I am particularly intrigued by the Spetsnaz in person with some of their best operatives, snatching General Hussein al-Hassan and bring him to Moscow. And, as I wrote it today, it's not to put him in a comfortable dacha in front of the Lake Baikal. No. He's going to be talking business and long-term business. So this is far from over. It's just beginning. And of course, Russia has, in terms of discussing, especially with Turkey, what they want, probably the only leader that Erdogan really listens to in the world is Putin. He doesn't listen to anybody else. And the only one that he really respects. So the margin of maneuver is enormous. Which comes back to all these pre-fall of Damascus secret deals, which we'll never know about, of course. But the interest, I would say that the really, really interesting link is what Erdogan and Putin more or less established. Next steps ahead.